All right, Dylan, we're live. Perfect. Let me get it all set up here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll kick things off here with our Ecom Weekly Live. This is the first edition. We're doing office hours. So essentially, what we're going to do today is go through some of the most talked about discussion topics and questions from our client base over the past couple of weeks. So a special edition here, something we're launching for the first time. We'll definitely be doing more of these. But as mentioned, the goal of today is to share the most asked questions and heavily discussed topics from this past week across our client base of high growth 7 and 8 figure D2C brands. So we've compiled a lot of information here that we'll go through. We'll also have a Q&A section at the end of the presentation if anybody has any questions about what we discussed, or if there's anything within your own brand currently that you're dealing with that you want our input on. But I'll do quick intros of who's chatting today. So I'll introduce myself, and I'll let Dylan introduce himself as well, and we'll get going. So I'm Liam, one of the founding partners at Aplo Group and a co-founder of Allen as well. I'll pass it off to Dylan, and then we'll continue on.
Got the same title as you, Liam.
Exactly, exact same. We'll keep it going then. But quickly before we jump into the content, quick intro into Apple Group. So Apple Group, we are a growth marketing firm for direct consumer brands, providing services across the marketing, financial, and software side. We've worked with over 100 brands, and we work with brands typically within the 5 to 100 million per year range on the D2C front. The other piece that's mentioned there is Alan. You'll all get an email afterwards with information about this, but this is an internal tool we built at Aplo. And at its core, it's an inventory powered marketing platform for D2C Shopify brands. There's some features on the side you can see here. We'll send an email follow up afterwards, and you can check that out. And everybody that's attending will get a free trial as well of the tool for certain functionality, which I'll clarify in the email. But with that being said, we'll jump into the agenda. So, two main things we're touching on, as mentioned a couple times now, the most asked questions and topics from our client base in the past couple of weeks. We'll then go through a Q&A session as well for anybody that has any questions about the content that we went through or any other questions, as mentioned, that you want our feedback on within your brand. So that being said, I will kick it off to the first question. And so I'm going to float this over to Dylan. Dylan and I, before this, were chatting. We put together some questions here that have been kind of common discussion points over the past couple of weeks. The first one is, at what size should I consider diversifying ad platforms? So Dylan, you can take it away here, and we'll keep chugging along.
It depends on what type of product you're selling, but generally, if you're a CPG brand, high LTV, there's a really good chance that you can get to 8 figures a year just off of your core acquisition channel, which in most cases are going to be Meta. If you are a higher SKU count store, sometimes it might make sense to diversify a little bit earlier, but honestly, in many cases, you're still looking at probably getting to the 8 figure range off of one core channel. Um, at the very least, I'd say this. You want to make sure that by the time you're diversifying ad platforms, you're risking profits, meaning
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you're still struggling to build a balance sheet and be consistently profitable, you probably haven't mastered one core channel for one core offer. You want to think about diversifying ad platforms when it's like, hey, I made 80K of profit last month, cash flow is healthy. I'm going to allocate 10K, 15K next month to test the next channel to get diversification. If you are doing ad platform diversification for the sake of diversification, it's also possible that you may also want to even think about more offers before you think about more ad channels. Because the truth is that often if your meta performance slows down, there's a good chance your TikTok or your app loving is as
Yeah.
well due to your offer in the marketplace. So it's easier to diversify via ad platforms than it is to say diversify via offer and or new product. But if you're truly looking for diversification, oftentimes offer a new product is better, but broadly speaking, make sure you're risking profits to do it. And in many cases, it's at least 8 figures, but sometimes lower.
Awesome. And Dylan, so another thing to just ask your opinion on, or just kind of get your take on, most brands that are asking this question and kind of floating this topic, what platforms are they typically considering in terms of diversifying on? Obviously, like about a year ago, year and a half ago or so, we had kind of that big app loving moment where a lot of brands were looking to diversify on app love, and that was kind of the hot platform at that moment. Kind of is like not fizzled out, it's kind of just maintained. But right now, what are most brands looking for here or asking about?
Yeah, it's usually TikTok or app loving,
Yeah.
one or the other. You can. especially for ads specifically as those two. There's other avenues that are like non-ad growth channels, but
Yeah.
it still generally holds true. Whether it's like whether you want to go and test TikTok Shop or insert some sort of an influencer program on a different channel, like those things can be great. And some brands even start on the come up in those channels. But when you're small and you can only allocate so much inventory to so many channels, you want to make sure you find one that is scalable for you and that you can actually get it to a place where the profits are healthy. So
Yeah.
it's a balance for sure, but most commonly it's TikTok or App Lovin.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point you made there too. One thing that we discuss a lot with brands, especially smaller ones that are kind of in the initial phases, a lot of times at that stage, many brands kind of get this feeling that they need to diversify to as many platforms as possible to try it and find something that's going to work better than their current platform, which might be Meta. But in most cases, to your point there, Dylan, what we typically recommend, what a lot of brands should be doing is just really focusing on that one
Mhm.
channel that's actually providing returns and that's actually scalable for them at this time before looking to diversify elsewhere. So we'll move on to our second question here that we put together. So this is a really good one. We've done actually some live webinars before with our partners at Friedero CFO and John over there about different options on the financing side. This I think is a question that is always a hot topic and it's always something that one of our clients is floating and considering. So Dylan, take it away here with the second question. Should I use financing options like Shopify Capital?
Not if you have better credit options, but if it's the best credit option you have, it probably, should at least be considered, but you have to be very careful. So, we've done, as Leah mentioned, live streams in the past about, you know, uh, do you use merchant cash advance, which is, traditionally what Shopify Capital would be considered? Do
Mhm.
you have, like shorter term financing, a credit line, uh, more of a traditional loan. The reality is that some of the latter products I just mentioned are often better in terms of ongoing utility because maybe it's a revolver, or perhaps the term is a little bit longer, or the rate is better. The difficult thing with Shopify Capital or Wayflyer or some of these other cash advance tools or platforms providers is that the rate that you pay is very high.
Yeah.
And if it's a percentage of daily sales repayment, the speed in which you have to pay it back is also sometimes fast. So I'll give you an example. Traditionally, these products are used by like seven-figure brands, sometimes larger, but oftentimes as you get bigger, you have better sources of capital you can tap into. But if I'm trying to make a PO and I expect to basically make a PO and I want to sell through that inventory over the next 6 months, if these MCAs are taking a percentage of daily sales and you're pacing to sell out of to pay that loan back in 4 months, it's actually possible that you're going to need to re-up on another capital source depending on how your cash flow is planned. So the issue with these products are twofold. One, you have to make sure that you forecast appropriately when you're going to pay it back and make sure from a
Mhm.
cash flow planning standpoint it's feasible. Sometimes you can get different repayment plans that are fixed monthly amounts that maybe make this a little bit more manageable. And then the second is you just have to make sure you get a positive return on your capital. So people will basically say, never use these, the rates are crazy. Well, they are high, but if it's your only option, you can still make money on it. So at the
Yeah.
end of the day, as long as you do the math and you actually say, hey, like I am going to clearly make a positive ROI on this expensive capital, if it is your best capital that you have from an option standpoint, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The where you don't want to use these options are if you have a really tight cash flow situation and you're going to have to basically continuously get more and more and more capital with a provider like this, um, or if you have a very tight ROI, like if you have low confidence or low conviction that you're going to be able to get a really healthy return on investment on a debt product like this, well then that's a situation where you don't want to be because it's expensive. So you really want the payoff to be big. So in short, it's a great solution, but you just want to be careful that, it's not going to be too risky or cash intensive for your brand.
Yeah, yeah. And if anybody wants more information on this topic specifically, because again, this is something that probably if we did office hours every single week or two, a live episode. I'm sure that this question would be something that is one of the most asked ones by our client base. It's a very common one when people are assessing different options here. There is a video, and I'll send it out in the follow-up to everybody that's registered, that we did with, again, Free to Grow, our partner there, on our joint podcast, the Ecom Scaling Show, that dives into this in detail. So I'll link that afterwards, but it's a great episode to check out if you want more information on what Dylan just mentioned there. So this is the next question that we have pulled together, and we have two other questions after this. Another really common one that's been coming up lately in the past couple of weeks is, how do I best use loyalty platforms with my subscribe and save tools? So at Apple, we work with a lot of food and beverage and CPG brands, so high subscription oriented businesses. And so we often have a lot of discussions surrounding this side of the equation. So I'll pass over to Dylan to give some insight on the discussion here with the clients on this topic.
Yeah, so if you have a brand that runs subscribe and save and you look at your cohort analysis for a subscribe and save customer on order one versus a one-time purchase, you're often going to find the subscribe and save customer is worth way more to you over the long term. So what does that mean? Well, subscription customers are inherently more valuable. And if that is true, what you do not want to incentivize is people canceling their subscription. The problem with loyalty platforms when you have subscribe and save is frequently the way in which these loyalty programs are set up in a way where it sort of incentivizes your subscribers to cancel because sometimes maybe you can't apply the points effectively as you want on your subscription. Maybe the way that you're kind of, marketing the use of loyalty points also kind of encourages cancellation. So some of the subscribe and save apps have good integrations from a loyalty standpoint that make this easier to manage, but you want to make sure that no matter what tech stack you have from a loyalty and subscription standpoint, you're just building the program with subscription in mind. So there's no one size fits all approach other than that statement. You just want to make sure that your loyalty program in terms of
Yeah.
how it's built actually encourages the subscription retention.
Yeah, and key point that you said there, Dylan, is like the subscription, the cohort that are subscribers are typically your most valuable by far. So absolutely want to make sure that that works well. This is a really good question. We actually did another live workshop a week ago, or sorry, yeah, no, a week ago, on the creative strategy and just the whole kind of creative, basically the entire how to get leverage out of your creative team and your creative strategy team in kind of the world of AI and in 2026. And we talked a lot about AI creative and AI ads and AI workflows around the whole creative side of things, specifically for Meta. So should I launch fully AI ads? Very interesting topic. A lot we could kind of riff off of here, Dylan, but go for it first, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you uh, if you think of creative as a unit of investment that has a cost associated, and that cost is how much it costs to make, and then a potential return, because of how Meta works and in the context of Meta, the way if you run your ads the way we run ads, oftentimes bad ads never really get much spend. So effectively, when you think of it from a return on investment standpoint, one of the ways you get a disproportionate return isn't just if you find the winners, it's if you can drive the cost of ads down. And how do you drive the cost of ads down the most? It's with leverage. And what's the biggest source of leverage these days in creative processes? It's AI. So if I use, I'll use big round numbers for the sake of example. Let's say I made like a really nice video, and a year or two ago it cost me $1,000 to make. Maybe now it costs me $200 to make, and maybe eventually it's going to cost me $2 to make. I don't know. The As you go down that curve, it's orders of magnitude cheaper. That means the return becomes when it works becomes orders of magnitude higher, and then it's essentially just an input of how many more of these can I shove into the system. So one extreme is you might go from launching 20 ads a week to 200 ads a week to 2,000 ads a week eventually, even if we're not there yet. But the only way you get there on a reasonable cost basis for many brands is going to be with the deployment of AI. And if you don't, you're going to be competing with other brands that are doing some of these workflows.
Mhm.
So some of this is conceptual because some of it's not there yet, but increasingly AI ads are going to be adopted, and the brands that adopt it are probably going to be the ones that stay competitive. Now, I'm using the word stay competitive because I think the baseline is going to be that everyone eventually adopts it. So, where's the edge? And the edge is going to come down to offering product. Additionally, one of the issues with with AI creative is context. So, if you're telling a system, "Hey, go and get me the best results," defining the result is actually hard because in many
Yeah.
cases, and this is one of the counters to fully AI ads that advertisers, us, and others are going to have to figure out is if the objective is meta 7-day click ROAS, it's possible that in some cases, the actual outcome that performs the best is very off brand. And ultimately, I think we're going to have to be okay with that. But long term, if you want to build durable revenue, you still have to build an ecosystem or a community around your brand where people come back again and again and again. So there has to be some constraint, or at least there has to be some additional thought behind how do I still build that brand if I know so many of my ads are so direct response that sometimes they go off brand. And I don't think anyone has the perfect answer to that yet. But what I do
Yeah.
know is that thinking about that to make sure while this stuff gets rolled out in other places other than your ad account, you make efforts to maintain that brand and create that community, I think it's going to be important. So that's my nuanced
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah. And I think like to build on the last point, Dylan, I think it also just shows how important somebody that's really kind of dictating creative strategy and kind of the brand voices in this picture. Because one thing that happens often when you're using a lot of like let's say making tons of iterations with AI off of top performers and you're incorporating like you're sharing context to other high performing ads in the ecosystem. A lot of times what ends up happening is you kind of have a very buzz like kind of buzzy hook that gets people in, but the substance of the actual ad and what you're trying to convey to the customer and the psychological response you're trying to generate sometimes gets lost in kind of that slop, for lack of a better term. So having somebody that can really dictate and operationalize the whole process here, but really own that kind of discussion about okay, what are we actually trying, like what type of brand are we trying to become and how are we trying to speak to our customers, I think is key. And that's something that last week Katie and I dove into pretty heavily on our webinar there on creative strategy, and she had some really great points too. So but absolutely, AI is a great tool here. How fast can I scale spend if I'm very profitable? So a pretty general question here to go off of, but I think this is something that I think we're always discussing with brands at some point. Obviously, brands want to grow, and if they're profitable, how aggressive can they actually grow? So this is something that we're dealing with on a weekly basis across the board, is really identifying what is the maximum growth rate that the business or our clients can sustain. So I'm sure that's kind of where this is coming from, Dylan, but we'll let you kick it off and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, it comes down to what is the next constraint other than profit. And most commonly, I mean, if you're vertically integrated, it might be actually making the product. If you're not, it's probably lead times. Or if it's not, and you have really tight lead times and you're not making the product and there's not many constraints, the real constraint becomes how much inventory are you confident in buying that you are comfortable with the risk profile associated. So when you do any sort of forecasting exercise, there's it's important to assign a degree of confidence or probability to a base case outcome. And when you're forecasting your growth as a brand, especially if you're going from maybe you did 5 million bucks this year and you think you're going to do 20 next year. Now that's a very aggressive growth rate, and most brands don't grow at that rate. But there are exceptions of where there are crazy growth rates. And if you find yourself in one of those categories where you're very profitable, because define very profitable, but you're just like printing money. Let's say that you want to, follow that growth rate, but you have 3 month lead times. All of a sudden, you have to basically make a bet into the future with your inventory that that's going to come true. So, and when you start forecasting, 3, 4x growth, you have to be very careful to make sure that you appreciate the fact that that's so ahead of the curve on like CAC attrition, that you, amongst other things, that you're the probability of you getting the forecast wrong versus if you were just, expecting the to forecast outcomes if you were growing 30 or 40% is much higher. So you have to make sure that if you're going to place inventory bets, educated bets, of course, across that expected growth rate, that you are really making sure that either A, your balance sheet can maintain it if things go wrong, and B, you're maybe taking a more conservative efficiency expectation on what can happen to your cash flow if things aren't nearly as efficient as you think. If you're a really high LTV brand with a small SKU count, you can underwrite that risk way easier. If you're super first time customer dependent, you
Hmm.
better make sure that you have a lot of margin left over. And just to be super quick on this, why the LTV matters, even if all of a sudden acquisition was 50% of expectation, if you have a super high LTV, instead of selling through those products in 3 months, you may sell through it in 9. Sucks from a cash flow standpoint, but ultimately you have that risk mitigator with your high LTV built into your brand. If you're not and you're first time customer dominant, you have to be much more careful. The short answer to this is if you're super profitable, how fast can you scale? You can scale as fast as the constraint. And in a consumer product business, it's usually inventory and what you can appropriately buy that from a risk adjusted return standpoint.
Hmm. Demand planning is important, folks.
Yeah, come talk
Um,
to Alan.
exactly, exactly. But I don't, nothing else to add there. Don't, that was good on that end. We'll pause the recording here for Q&A. So appreciate you tuning in. And if you're watching on YouTube, you should have got most of the content here. We do these live every Thursday, so feel free to check out that link below in the description. It'll link you to our website where you can register for every single upcoming webinar. But we're going to stop the recording and do Q&A. But thank you for watching.